Hello students, and welcome to chapter number 7. In this chapter we will be discussing the different constraints that managers have. What that means is that managers not always have the ultimate power and the absolute control over the organization. Sometimes and oftentimes they are limited, they are constrained by different aspects, by different factors, including the environment, whether it's the external or the internal environment. So throughout this chapter we will be discussing the different environments and the different constraints that managers are faced with. So let us begin with a question. The question is, whenever there is a success or a failure, can we attribute that entirely to the managers, or should we attribute that entirely to external circumstances? Whenever there's a success or failure, is it the managers that are responsible for that success or failure, or is it outside of their hands? So here we have two different points of views about this. The first one is called the omnipotent view of management. This view says that managers are directly responsible for an organization's success or failure. It is them. They are the ones who make these big decisions. So if there's something positive that has happened, or if there's something that is negative that has happened, we always say that it is because of them. The other point of view is called the symbolic view of management. This view says that much of the success or failure of organizations is not attributed directly to managers, but it is rather because of circumstances and forces that are outside of their control, outside of the control of managers. So if something bad happens in the organization, it's not 100% because of the manager. Maybe it is because of something outside of his or her capacity. One example of this is the decrease of sales, for example, انخفاض المبيعات. Sometimes people say it is because of the manager. He made a bad decision, and because of that decision we don't have customers anymore coming to buy our products. But others can view it differently and say that it's not because of the manager, it is the economic situation. الحالة الاقتصادية العامة في البلد خلت الناس ما عندها فلوس, and therefore they cannot buy our products and get our services. So two points of views. Omnipotent view says that it is the managers who are responsible for any success or failure, and the symbolic view says it is outside forces. Outside forces. Alright, so we just saw the 2 points of views about managers. Let us see what is actually happening in reality. So in practice, managers do not have all the power, and they are also not 100% helpless. So their decisions and actions are actually constrained. They are constrained, meaning they are limited. They have boundaries within which they can work. Okay, so what are those constraints? Here we talk about the culture and we talk about the environment. So let us go back and discuss this again. So we can never say that managers are extremely powerful and they have all the power in the world and they can do everything they can or want in order to impact and influence the organization. At the same time, we cannot say that they have nothing to do with success or failure of the organization. They do contribute to that, but they work within limited boundaries. هم يشتغلون في مساحة محدودة. So they are bounded by the culture of the organization and the environment, the external environment of the organization as well. So here's kind of an illustration that basically shows this concept. So two things go into making those decisions: the environment and the culture. So if you want to make a decision as a manager, you have to consider the environment and you have to consider the culture. احيانا انت نفسك تتخذ قرار معين as a manager، لكن انت محدود باشياء معينه، محدود بقدرات معينه، في ناس معينين لازم تاخذهم في عين الاعتبار. You also have to consider the culture of the organization. Is this something that will go well? Is this something that will resonate well with people, or is it something that is not going to be accepted and will receive much resistance? So culture, the environment, both of these factors are extremely important to managers when making decisions. So we mentioned the word environment more than once since the beginning of this lecture. What do we mean by this external environment? What things exist in this environment? What factors and aspects? So here's this formal definition of what we mean by the external environment: those factors and forces outside the organization that affect its performance. The external environment it does include many different components and factors. So anything that exists outside the organization but has an impact on its performance is considered part of the external environment. So if we dig deeper into those factors, it will make things a little bit more clear. So we start with economic factors. So the economy, this is one thing that does not exist inside the organization. It's rather outside of the organization, and you as a company do not have any control over it, but you are affected by it. تتأثر الشركة بالوضع العام الاقتصادي في البلد, of course. وهذا عامل خارجي. You do not have any control over it, but you are still affected and impacted and influenced by this factor. So the economic aspect encompasses factors like interest rates, inflation, changes in disposable income, and so on. All of those important concepts that you study in your microeconomics course. So how is this important to us as an organization? Of course, this is extremely important. The general economy, the general economic state of the country, of the place that we live in, that we operate and function in as an organization, is of course going to shed its light on the culture, how people interact, whether or not we as an organization can make profits or not. So of course these are things that affect the organization. تخيل لما تكون الحالة الاقتصادية في البلد بشكل عام ضعيفة، ما راح يكون الناس عندها قوة شرائية، ما راح تشتري منك، فبالتالي you are not making much profit. So of course you are affected by the economy. The second factor is the demographical factor, demographics. So what do we mean by demographics? Here we talk about categories of people. So whenever you are filling out a survey or a questionnaire, you always have to answer such questions like, how old are you? How much income do you make? What is your salary? Where do you live? Are you married? Are you a male or a female? So these are those demographical factors. Okay, so we talk about age, we talk about education levels, we talk about income levels, we talk about geographic locations, and so on. Okay, and of course things like race, gender. So imagine a company that works that has a branch in a city where most of the people who live in that city are above 50 years old. So you are in a community that is considered rather old. So of course the strategies now that you follow must target that particular segment. So you have to shape your strategies and your products and the way you even formulate your messages in a way that appeals to that demographic. The third aspect or factor is the political or legal aspect. So the rules, the regulations, the laws, all of those things that are set by the government. انت ما عندك كنترول على القوانين اللي تحطها وزارة العمل، هي تحطها الوزارة وانت لازم تتبعها. So انت تتأثر بهذه القوانين. So this is why we say that this is part of the external environment. شيء ما هو جزء من الشركة، ما هو داخل الشركة، لكن انت ما زلت تتأثر فيه. You are still affected by rules and regulations of the Ministry of Labor, for example. You have to obey them, you have to be in compliance with them all the time, but you have no control over them. Continuing the explanation of those external environment, we have the technological aspect, technology. So scientific or industrial innovations. Of course, technology has revolutionized businesses. It has also revolutionized how even people interact with one another. It has completely changed working environments. So it depends on how technology is incorporated into the industry of the organization. So let us put it this way. Is technology considered a big part of the business of your organization or not? When technology is considered a big part, now you are affected by this aspect. When technology is not necessarily a big part of your industry and your profits as an organization doesn't really depend on technology that much, then technology is something that you don't really have to worry about. But of course, nowadays, every single organization, regardless of its size, regardless of its sector, regardless of what products or services do they offer, all of them are affected and influenced by technology. Moving on, the socio-cultural factor. So this is concerned with the societal and cultural factors like values, attitudes, trends, traditions, lifestyles, beliefs, and so on. So here we talk about the local society. We talk about the culture of that society. We talk about their customs, their traditions. What do they believe in? Okay, how do they think? How do they live? تكلم على المجتمع حق الشركة، المجتمع اللي تشتغل في الشركة هذه. هل هم ناس محافظين؟ هل هم ناس open minded؟ ايش القيم حقتهم؟ ايش اهتماماتهم؟ ايش اذواقهم؟ كيف طريقة تعاملهم؟ Okay, so of course these are things that you must consider because these are your customers. These are part of your stakeholders. You have to consider them. You are affected by them. And finally, the global aspect or the global factor, which encompasses issues associated with globalization. Nowadays, companies do not settle only for local or domestic markets. They go globally by simply starting a web page or an Instagram account. You can sell products all over the world. So of course, the globalization aspect plays an important role in the business environment, and as such, the organization must take it into consideration whenever they are making decisions. They are affected by globalization, and therefore they must consider it and be sure that they are factoring it in whenever they are setting plans or strategizing. So this exhibit or graph basically summarizes the 6 factors that exist in the business environment that is external to the organization. So you have the economic factors, demographics, political or legal. socio-cultural, technological, and finally global aspects. We have discussed each and every one of them. Try to think of them as aspects, factors, elements that exist outside of the organization, and the organization does not have any control over them, but organizations are still affected and influenced by them. So they have to consider them and keep them in mind whenever they make decisions. We have discussed how the economic environment is of great importance to managers, to business leaders, because it highly affects the organization and the business. So for that reason, managers and business leaders must be aware of the economic context. What that means is that they need to be aware, they need to be informed of the changes in the economy, of the changes not only in the local economy but of the global economy. They need to be aware of what's going on. You will study or have already studied courses like microeconomics and macroeconomics, so you have an understanding of things like inflation rates, unemployment rates, etc. So you have to be aware as a business leader and as a manager that of these types of factors, so that you are able to make accurate decisions and decisions that can be best for the type of constraints that you have, whether it's unemployment, whether it's inflation, whether it's the cost of raw material, etc. So the economic environment and the economic context is something that managers and business leaders must be very familiar with, as it highly influences the organization. In economy, there's always this discussion and debate of, inequality between the rich and the poor, and you have to, as a business leader, you have to also be aware of such things, because these represent societal attitudes, the attitudes of society about, the gap, about the the gap and inequality between the rich and the poor. So when you are aware of such attitudes, you are able to make decisions within this context. You don't want to make a decision that the society does not accept. Otherwise, your business strategy is basically going to fail. So for that reason, you also must be aware and must be informed of the attitudes of society when it comes to economic context. What does it mean to society? And how societies are different, for example, when it comes to appreciation of materials, when it comes to appreciation of wealth, etc. Within that type of context and within these constraints, you can function as a leader of business and you can make decisions that help the organization prosper. The demographic environment is, of course, of great importance to managers and business leaders as well, because what are organizations? As we have seen in the previous chapter, organizations are merely groups of people that, that work together to achieve the objectives of the company. So we need to look deeper into the composition of those people. What are the patterns that they share? What are the values that they share? Typically speaking, in general, you have different age groups. So you have baby boomers, and those are the people who were born between the 1940s and the 1960s, and then you have Generation Y, or they are often referred to in literature as millennials, and these are the people who were born between the late 1970s, the 80s, and early 1990s. And then you have post-millennials, or sometimes they're referred to as the I generation. So based on how your workforce is composed, then you can also, make decisions within that context. Because what motivates baby boomers is different from what motivates Generation Y, and is different from what motivates the I generation. Baby boomers, for example, are now more interested in retirement, are more interested in giving back to society. Generation Y or millennials, they are more interested or more motivated by innovation, by technology. And then of course you have the I generation, which these are the people who were born into this age of technology, and technology absolutely makes sense to them. So what motivates them, what keeps them motivated, and what keeps them more energetic at the workplace is absolutely different from other generations as well. So these are the constraints that we are talking about. The demographic environment constrain managers. You cannot just simply make a decision and assume that it will be the right one. You have to examine the environments in which you exist. And here's an example of how can this be put into practice. Generation Y, or what is often referred to as millennials, these are the people who were born between the years of late 1970s and early 1990s. So in Facebook, for example, most of the people who are hired by Facebook are people belonging to Generation Y. So they are mostly people under the age of 40. So because of the nature of Facebook's work, so they want employees who are tech savvy. They are they know how to handle technology. They want people who are free spirited. They want people who are innovative, who are creative, who appreciate challenge, who are actually motivated by challenge and exploring new ideas. So within that context, now the managers at Facebook and the leaders of Facebook can operate. So when you have a workforce, when you have a group of employees who are of that age group, who are of that demographic, now you understand more as a manager, how can you motivate them, how can you create policies that support them, etc. Building on to the same discussion of how different environments can affect and influence decision making by managers, here's another type of example. So jobs and employment, for example. So during the world economic crisis back in 2006, 2008, when the entire world economy was suffering from recession, a lot of employees were let go, were fired, basically because there were no more money to pay their salaries and their expenses. So the way jobs were created and even managed by managers and business leaders was entirely different. For example, there was more dependency on freelancers, on temporary workers. So we don't need to hire someone for example, as a secretary permanently. We just need them to be here for only 2 days a week. So instead of hiring someone full-time, we hire someone on a part-time basis or on a contract agreement. So this is how such environments constrain managers when it comes to leading the organization and leading the business. Whenever we are analyzing or examining the environment of an organization, whether it's the external or the internal one, we need to assess something called uncertainty. So uncertainty composes of two factors: the degree of change and the degree of complexity. And when we talk about change, we mean unpredictable change. Unpredictable change. So change that cannot be anticipated, that cannot be guessed accurately. So when we analyze an environment in terms of degree of change, we have organizations that have a stable environment, and then we have an organization which have a dynamic environment. So an organization with a stable environment is one that is run smoothly, is one that doesn't have a lot of new competitors, is one that doesn't have a lot of new ideas and innovation to its operations. So everything is running very smoothly and in a stable way. But an environment that is dynamic is one that is constantly changing, is one that has a lot of breakthroughs, is one that is always responsive to what's going on in the business environment or in the industry. So this is, of course, depending on the degree of change that you have in your environment, then definitely you as a manager will be constrained, will be limited by, how much control and how much, you know, how much how much of a good grip you have on your own business. And then the degree of complexity. So from the word complicated. So a complex work environment can be one that has a lot of components basically. So environments can be simple, meaning you don't have a lot of competitors, you don't have a lot of suppliers, everything is very simple, everything is can be can be managed in a not necessarily in a very complicated way. So you don't have a lot of suppliers, you don't have a lot of influencers on the environment, but one that is complex, an environment of an organization that is complex. It means that you have a lot of components affecting your business, you have a lot of suppliers, you have a lot of groups that can affect your business, you have a lot of governmental agencies that you have to that you have to coordinate with, etc. So of course when you assess an environment you have to look into the degree of change and the degree of complexity, and by making that examination you should be more effective when it comes to knowing your limitations as a decision maker. And here's an illustration or a visual so that you understand how can you dissect the an environment of an organization in terms of uncertainty. So remember, we have two kinds of factors. At the very top we have the degree of change, and we can classify change into stable or dynamic. And then on the left hand side you have the degree of complexity, and in here you can classify complexity into either complex or simple. So it's basically a matrix where you have different types of situations. So what I would advise you to do is that you could either pause the video or come back to the slides later and then try to read each and every one of those cells. See how can they how are they mapped against each other. So an environment that is both stable and simple, what does it look like? And then an environment that is both complex and stable, or complex and dynamic, what does it look like? How is it composed? And what are the different factors that exist in such an environment? So this takes us to what is referred to as stakeholders. This is a very important term that you must understand. So what do we mean, first of all, by stakeholders? If you look at the definition over here, a stakeholder is anyone at all. A person, a group of people, a company, an organization, whatever, any constituency, any entity, any person, any company, anyone at all that is in the organization's decisions and actions. Meaning, anyone who is affected by the organization or is or actually affects the organization. Okay, either affected by the company or actually influences the organization. Okay, so anyone at all. And once we go through the list, I'm sure you will understand it much better. So the nature of stakeholder relationships is another way in which the environment influences managers. So in order for a manager to make a decision, نرجع لأول المحاضرة لما قلنا هل المدراء هذول عندهم السلطة والقوة المطلقة وبالتالي النجاح والفشل ينسب لهم بالكامل، ولا ما في يدهم شيء وكل حاجة خارج إرادتهم. We said, of course, the answer to that question is that neither is correct. ولا واحد من ال situations هذه صحيحة. هم عندهم سلطة ولكنهم في نفس الوقت سلطتهم غير مطلقة، وأيضا في أشياء تحدهم وفي يعني limitations and they are bounded by certain factors. What are those factors? 6 اللي اتكلمنا عنهم قبل شوية. And now we will talk about stakeholders. So stakeholders are anyone at all who is either affected by the organization. أي شيء تسويه الشركة يأثر على هؤلاء الناس، المجموعات، الشركات، الأشخاص، أو هو أو هذه الشركة، هذه المجموعة، هذه المجموعة من الأشخاص يؤثرون على الشركة. Okay? Either affected by it or actually affects and impacts the organization. Okay, so now take a look at all of those stakeholders of any organization. So basically everything and everyone who is involved, who interacts with the organization, is a stakeholder. So uh, customers, employees, suppliers, the government, the community, the society, competitors, all of those entities, all of those constituencies are considered stakeholders. In the case of JUC, for example, Jubail University College, who are the stakeholders of Jubail University College? We don't have customers, but we have students. Of course, employees like faculty members and teachers are a major stakeholder. Let's talk even about employers. So companies like SABIC, companies who give jobs to our graduates, so they affect JUC or are affected by JUC. So all of those are considered stakeholders of organizations. And you as a manager, whenever you are making a decision, you have to consider the impact of that decision on all of those stakeholders. So this is why we say you do not have all the power, because you have to consider, how is this decision going to affect the local community? How is it going to affect my competitors? Or how is it going to affect my shareholders, the people who actually own the company? Okay? So now we just saw those stakeholders. So why should we keep good relationships with them? Why should we keep good relationships with our customers? Why should we keep positive connections with our suppliers? Why should we keep good relationship with governmental agencies, for example? Because of the following reasons. First, keeping good relationships improves the predictability of environmental changes. We always say that the business environment is always dynamic, it's always evolving, it's always changing. And this change is natural, of course, but for us as an organization, when things change too often, when things are becoming too difficult for us to predict, we cannot make good decisions. And maybe we will make a decision that is going to result in a disaster. So when we keep good relationships with such stakeholders, we improve the likelihood, the predictability of us making the right decision. So we reduce uncertainty. We increase also successful innovations. Businesses nowadays are all about ideas. They are all about creativity, innovation. Okay? So when you keep good relationships with such stakeholders, you create an environment and, pave the way for better ideas to come up. So sometimes good ideas come from your employees, good ideas can come from your customers, they can come from the local community. So if you do not have such good relationships with these constituencies, with these stakeholders, it means you do not have, open communications with them, and they will not feel free to share some of those ideas. And then you increase trust among stakeholders. Of course, they trust you better, they trust you more. They when you keep good relationships with them, they would always keep in business with you. You want your customers to keep coming back to you. You want your suppliers to not say, starting tomorrow we do not like you, so we will not give you the raw material that you need to make your product. وعشان كذا في كثير من الشركات تسوي علاقات ممتازة جدا وتسوي اتفاقيات طويلة المدى مع مثلا الموردين أو السبلايرز. Okay? ليش؟ They want to ensure that the relationship is good so that we reduce any uncertainty. We reduce the likelihood of something bad happening. And finally, this results in greater organizational flexibility to reduce the impact of change. When you at least have good relationships with your suppliers, with your customers, with the government, and the public sector in general, this means that you can respond to changes better. You are more flexible because you have now reduced the impact of change. ما راح اتفاجئ بكره انه السبلاير سوالي مشكله، ما راح اتفاجئ بكره انه مكتب حكومي زعلان علي وقيد بعض صلاحياتي. Why? Because I'm keeping good relationships already with them. So these are the benefits of why organizations should always keep positive connections and good relationships with their stakeholders. Now moving on to the second part of the chapter. The chapter was about the environment. That was part number 1, the one that we have been discussing since the beginning of this lecture. And then part number 2, which is about the culture of the organization. So now we will start discussing the lecture, the culture. So when we talk about organizational cultures, think of it this way. What makes Khalid different from Muhammad? They both have different personalities. خالد شخص كاجوال كذا وما يحب الرسميات وتقدر تتواصل معاه بكل سهولة، ترسل له واتساب ما عنده مشكلة، تكلمه بالجوال ما عنده مشكلة، ترسل له ايميل SMS whatever، كله يعتبر بالنسبة لخالد acceptable. محمد شخص يحب الرسميات، يقول لك أنا ما أحب لما تراسلني عن طريق الواتساب، لما يكون موضوع هام أرجو أنك أنت ترسل لي في إيميل. Okay? So they have different personalities, they have different styles, they have different preferences, different ways of communicating. The same thing applies to organizations. What makes organization A different from organization B? ليش بيئة العمل وثقافة العمل في الأحوال المدنية مختلفة تماما عن بيئة العمل في خلينا نقول هيئة الترفيه مثلا، مع أنها كلها الثنتين قطاع حكومي وجهات حكومية. Okay? Why is there a difference? This is what we are discussing right now, the culture of the organization. And the reason why we are talking about culture right now, we were discussing that earlier question. Do managers have all the power or everything is outside of their control? ذكرنا إنه الجزء الأول, the environment takes a little off their hands when it comes to control. The second part is the culture. Whenever managers make decisions, they are bounded, they are limited by the culture of the organization. So an organization's culture can make employees feel empowered, they can make them feel cherished, valuable, supported, or it can make them feel exactly the opposite. بعض الناس يقول لك يا أخي أنا أحس كأن الشركة هذه تكرهني، أحس كأنه أنا خصم ولا ند ولا كأني منافس للشركة هذه. وبعض الموظفين يقول لك بالعكس، الجهة اللي أعمل فيها تحسسني دائما أني أنا جزء من أسرة، تحسسني دائما أني أنا أخ وصديق وشخص هام في الشركة هذه. So you have to consider all of those things. What we will discuss from this point onwards is that how do organizations get there? How did company A become this way, and how did company B became the other way? ايش اللي خلى الشركة هذه تصير بيئة العمل فيها بالطريقة الفلانية والشركة الأخرى صارت بيئة العمل فيها طريقة معاكسة جدا. So culture, let's go back to summarize. Culture is extremely important. It affects managerial decision making, and you can think of it as the organization's personality. The organization's personality. As always, we begin with a formal definition of the concept. So organizational culture is the shared values, principles, traditions, and ways of doing things that influence the way organizational members act and that distinguish the organization from other organizations. So let's break it down. So shared values, principles, traditions, and ways of doing things. So we mentioned before, like the styles. Think of the organization as a person. A person has a personality. It, a person has preferences. A person has, a way of doing things. He or she has a style of communication, a style of clothes, a style of, like basically dealing with others and interacting with them. The same thing applies to organizations as well. This is how you can distinguish, this is how you can compare companies. So, how employees interact with one another, how employees interact with customers, how employees interact and communicate with other stakeholders like the local community, the suppliers, governmental offices, and so on. All of this comes from the culture of the organization. So we have to also keep in mind that cultural values and practices evolve over time. They change. They change. Culture is not necessarily stable throughout time. Lots of organizations are currently changing. Because of Vision 2030 here in the kingdom, the entire government sector is changing culture very quickly. So unlike before, where things depended on seniority, where things depended on bureaucracy, nowadays it's all about productivity, performance, and even innovation. So the culture of the organization can be perceived, can depends on perception, can be descriptive, it depends on how members describe it, or it is basically the shared experiences and perceptions of the employees. So point one, perception. So how individual employees experience working within this organization. When you ask Muhammad about how would you describe working at company A, he would say, this is the best place I have worked in. I think everyone should come and work here. I have been extremely happy. I like everything, and I like the people, and I like the management. You ask Khalid, who is also an employee at company A, but he has a completely different perception, a completely different idea, a completely different experience working in company A. He would say, this is the worst place ever. I advise anyone who is currently working here to just run for their lives, and I would advise everyone not to come work here. I like communication styles. I hate management. I hate my job. I hate everything about this organization. So perception is how you as an individual see the culture, how you judge it. Then the description of this culture, how the company describes its culture and how other people even describe it. الشركة كيف تكلمت على ثقافتها العمل حقتها وبيئة العمل حقتها في حساباتها على السوشيال ميديا مثلا، أو من خلال الويب سايت، كيف تكلمت على الميشن، الفيجن، الvalues, the principles, and so on. Okay? And then finally, all of those shared experiences among employees. So you ask a group of employees what do they think, and you try to form an opinion about the culture. So culture is something that is kind of complex to understand. Lots of research, lots of ideas and thoughts about culture. Basically, we will go through one aspect or one school of thought when it comes to culture. So this one says that we have basically seven dimensions of culture. And here are those seven dimensions. So things like attention to detail, stability, team orientation. Do we depend on teamwork or everything is about individuals? Uh, People orientation. Do we focus on the product or do we focus on our employees? Okay. Do we promote and encourage creativity, innovation, ideas that are outside of the box, or do we encourage things to be more traditional? So all of these seven factors are the dimensions that shape the culture of an organization. In lots of organizations, one cultural dimension is often emphasized more than others. And this is how you can make a distinction between company A and company B. Here's a nice example. Let's compare and contrast Sony and Southwest Airlines. In Sony, they focus on the product. They focus on innovation. Okay, because Sony is a company that produces electronics, so and the market for electronics is always changing and it is changing very fast. So in Sony, they focus on product innovation, they focus on risk taking. They ask their engineers, for example, to just try. Even if they fail, maybe they will come up with the next big thing, maybe they will come up with the next iPhone. Okay, so they do everything they can in order to encourage their employees to be more creative, and the most important part to Sony is the product itself. But to Southwest Airlines, it's not the product, it's the people. They focus on the employees, and they are at the center and at the heart of the culture of Southwest Airlines. So they take care of their people. They offer a service. Unlike Sony, they offer a service, not a product. So people and employees of Southwest Airlines interact directly with customers. مضيفين، الطيارين، عمال الشحن and so on. حقين شركة الطيران هذه. They deal directly with customers, and there are lots of other competitors. So if customers are unhappy with their experience, they are going to go to our competitors and we will lose money. So therefore, the company says we focus on our employees, we keep them happy, we keep them satisfied so that they deliver the best service, the best quality. And therefore, as a result, the customers are going to keep coming back. So here's a way to contrast and compare and distinguish two companies from one another. Up to how much do they take risk, or do they actually encourage it or discourage it? In some organizations, even if you make a mistake, they will give you a reward. You will get rewarded. You will get a prize or something. Because to them, it's about taking risk. It's about trying. In some other organizations, no. If you make a mistake, you are going to be severely punished, because they prefer things to be more traditional. No risk taking. Therefore, no creativity. Other aspects include things like, do we have freedom and control as employees, or we have close and narrow supervision by our managers? So do they give us space? Do they give us, do they trust us enough so that they don't have to come and check on us every 5 minutes? Or is it the exact opposite, where they have to be like standing over our heads to check our work. So these are the things that you should look for whenever you're applying to organizations as a future candidate in the future, or as a just as an observer whenever you talk to people who are working in any organization. You pick up these signals so that you can understand the culture of this organization. So we have been talking about cultures for some time now. So can we say that we have strong and weak cultures? Yes, we can. Based on what? Based on those values that we discussed. Okay? So to how, up to which extent are values widely shared? So we said that organizations have personalities just like people, just like individuals. ايش اللي يخليك انت تصير صديق مقرب من فلان وما تصير صديق قريب جدا من فلان الآخر هذا؟ شخصياتكم هل فيها تطابق وتوافق ولا لا؟ فبالتالي الموظفين اللي يشتغلون في الشركات كأنه نفس الحكاية تنطبق معهم. إلى أي مدى شخصيات هذه الموظفين وقيمهم وستايلهم يتوافق مع ستايل وقيم وشخصية الشركة هذه. Okay? So it's all about personality matching. Are we compatible or not? So if the company says that we value creativity, we give you space to work, we don't like people closely supervising you. لو كان الشخص أصلا من الستايل هذا، الشخص أصلا يحب الإبداع، يحب التجربة، ما يحب إنه يكون على راسه مانجر طول الوقت, and the environment of the organization already supports that, then of course you will have a very strong culture. لكن لو كان العكس، الشركة تحب الكرياتيفيتي، الشركة تشجع على التجربة، لكن الشخص اللي وظفوه مختلف تماما، شخص ما يحب ياخذ مخاطرة، ما يحب انه هو يبدأ، يفضل انه هو يكون المانجر معاه خطوة بخطوة عشان هو ما يحب يسوي اخطاء. Okay, so of course now there is no compatibleness between the personalities of these two entities, the employee and the organization. فبالتالي the culture is going to be weak because people do not identify with these values. So things like that exactly. Do employees understand the history of the organization and they identify with it and they connect to it? Okay, so a lot of these factors come with a cost of how exactly does the company instill and supports and promotes this sort of culture. So strong cultures are basically the ones in which people are really connecting with. So a culture in which the key values are intensely held and widely shared. So when an organization says and claims something as part of their mission, vision, values, and so on, and they back it up with actual evidence and they do practice it, then of course people are going to trust it more, and they are going like employees are going to be much closer to the organization. So when the company and the organization says that we value transparency, شفافية والوضوح, and employees actually see this in practice, كل شيء واضح وصريح، ما في hidden agenda، ما في أشياء سرية, everything is out in the open. Now this is a good foundation for a strong culture. So the stronger the culture becomes, the more it affects the way managers plan, organize, lead, and control. So basically what this point is saying, the culture of an organization has an impact on all of the managerial functions. All of the managerial functions, planning, organizing, leading, and controlling, are definitely affected by the culture. فبالتالي decision making. نرجع لأول سؤال في المحاضرة: do managers have all the power or are they limited? Yes, they are limited by the culture. لكن لما تكون الculture strong, this is now a good foundation for better decisions. And then strong cultures have been found to be strongly associated with better performance. لما تكون الculture حقت الشركة قوية, okay, and people really identify with this culture, they're really connecting to this culture, the performance of the organization is going to be stronger and better. So where does it come from? Where does organizational culture comes from? We have seen those 7 dimensions of cultures, but how did it originate? Where did it start? Of course, it starts with the founders of the organization, the people who actually started this company. Okay, so the person or persons who started this organization, they had a vision. They had something in their heads and they wanted to see it practiced in reality. So their vision definitely reflects on the culture of the organization, because they are the ones who are going to select people to run the business. صح، أنا المؤسس حق الشركة هذه، لكن في النهاية أنا راح أختار شخص إنه هو يدير الشركة، سواء بعد ما أنا أتقاعد أو like even currently. I will just act as an owner and just collect profit, but I will select someone who is more experienced than I am to run the business. So who are the founders going to choose? They are going to choose people who are very much similar to themselves, very similar to them. الناس يشبهون مؤسسين الشركة بشكل كبير، يشبهونهم من حيث الشخصية، يشبهونهم من حيث الستايل، يشبهونهم من حيث العقلية والتفكير and so on. So من هنا بدأت الثقافة أو الكالتشر حقت الشركة من التأسيس. Okay, so a good or like an important note over here is that the smaller the size of the organization, the easier it is to establish the culture. قارن بين شركتين، شركة فيها 5000 موظف وشركة فيها 50 موظف فقط. أكيد الشركة اللي فيها 50 موظف حيكون أسهل إنك أنت تؤسس فيها الثقافة جديدة أو تغير الثقافة اللي فيها، لأنه الأشخاص حيكونون عددهم أقل، شخصياتهم متقاربة بشكل أكثر. غير 5000 شخص صعب جدا إنه أنت يعني تغير عادات وستايل حق 5000 شخص. Then once culture is established, organizational practices help maintain it. What does that mean? Back up your claims, fulfill your promises. Now you have established this culture of transparency، الشفافية والوضوح. خلاص احنا عززناها وأسسنا لها وقاعدين نروج لها حتى في الشركة. How do you maintain it? How do you keep it? How do you grow it? خلي الناس والمدراء والموظفين كلهم يمارسون الثقافة هذه، كلهم يمارسون ويكتسبون الصفة هذه اللي هي الإفصاح والشفافية والوضوح وعدم الغموض. So transparency is being actually practiced and not just claimed. So the slide basically says that you have to consider a number of important factors whenever you think about culture, but of course culture starts and originates with the founders of the organization. So this is basically a visual representation of what we just discussed. So the vision, the philosophy of the founder of the organization definitely goes into selection of top management, and then of course these things are going to cascade down to shape the culture of the organization. مين المسؤولين عن خلق البيئة هذه؟ Leaders. The leaders of the organization are the ones who are responsible for this. So the founders, the top managers, and so on. So now, how can employees learn the culture? كيف أنا كشركة، كجهة عمل، كمنظومة، كيف أنا أزرع الثقافة اللي أحتاجها واللي أبغاها في الموظفين عندي، وكيف أنت كموظف تكتسب هذه الثقافة. Okay? You will learn an organization's culture in a number of ways. So we start with stories, as simple as that. Organizational stories about significant events in the life of the company. It helps keep the culture alive. When the CEO, when the manager, the supervisor, when other senior employees in the organization, they keep telling you things about the company. والله يا أخي في سنة 1988 حصل انفجار في الشركة وكذا وكذا، ولكن الشركة استطاعت أنها تتغلب على الصعوبة هذه والحمد لله وأصبحنا أفضل من المنافسين حتى and so on. So telling you stories like this make you more strongly associate with the place, with the organization in particular. So it makes you feel that you belong to something bigger, to something that has history, to something that has had a positive or negative experiences, but it survived. زي ما حصل مثلا في الاعتداء الأخير على شركة أرامكو، على الرغم أنه اعتداء بشع جدا، لكن هذه القصة راح يظل موظفين أرامكو يتكلمون عنها عشرات السنين من الآن. And this kind of success that Aramco has achieved by overcoming this difficulty, this has made people even more loyal to Aramco. So the first thing was stories. The second thing is rituals. What do we mean by rituals? So activities. Basically, rituals mean sequence of activities that basically express and reinforce important organizational values and goals. ايش العادات او الطقوس او النشاطات اللي تسويها الشركة. So this is why, for example, in some organizations they have things called casual Fridays. They have things called pizza days or open days. اوكي، صارت خلاص جزء من الطقوس اللي تمارسها الشركة هذه، واللي من خلالها زرعوا عادات معينة في موظفينهم، خلوا موظفينهم يكتسبون الثقافة اللي هم يبغونها. Okay, so through rituals, through things like pizza days and open days and casual Fridays, when I say they, I mean the organizations, they have sent messages about the culture, and people sometimes automatically just absorb it. Another way for organizations to instill culture is by using material artifacts and symbols. So actual material things that convey to employees what is important and the kinds of expected behaviors. So look out for symbols whenever you walk into an organization. هل المدراء لهم مكاتب كبيرة وفخمة ومنفصلة وخاصة؟ هل لهم مواقف سيارات مخصصة؟ هل لهم مميزات إضافية تشوفها ظاهرة؟ Okay? Or is it the exact opposite in some organizations? You can never distinguish the CEO or the vice president from any regular employee. أشكالهم كلهم زي بعض، يعني إنه ما يظهر على أحد مظاهر التمييز. مكتبه زيهم، سيارته عادية زيهم، ما عنده موقف مخصص، ما عنده شيء ثاني. So these are of course signals and symbols that represent culture. فهذا يعطيك كذا إشارات. هل هذه الشركة تقدر المظاهر والرسميات، ولا هل هذه الشركة ما يهمها المظاهر والرسميات قد ما يهمها الإنتاجية مثلا. Okay? And then finally the language. Of course, language is a huge part of the culture of an organization. احنا ما نتكلم language يعني عربي ولا انجليزي، نتكلم على المصطلحات الخاصة بالشركة هذه. Okay? The lingo, the technical language, the jargons, the acronyms, all of those things that only the employees of that company understand. زي ما في مصطلحات خاصة في الشلة عندكم ما حد يفهمها إلا أنتم فقط، في كذلك مصطلحات خاصة متعارف عليها في الشركة هذه. So, as a new employee, inshallah 4 years from now when you go for your co-op and your internship, you have to understand these things. You have to understand how people address each other. هل لما يجي يكتب ايميل يقول دير احمد ولا لازم دير مستر احمد ولا دير انجينير احمد؟ Okay, so you have to understand like the terms of language that people use to communicate, to interact, to basically deal with one another. Okay, you have to also understand all of those acronyms, jargons. So if someone in SABIC says operation, معناته they are referring to operations of the plant. Lakin if someone in a hospital says operation, it means they are referring to a surgery, to a surgical operation. So the point here is you have to understand the language, the terms that the members of the organization use so that you as an employee can be immersed into this new culture. Now we can conclude that culture definitely affects how managers operate, how managers work, because it's a major constraint. What that means is that managers can only function and operate within the culture of the organization. So what is considered acceptable or not acceptable within the organization, they need to make decisions that doesn't clash with the culture. Otherwise, it's going to be costly in terms, not only in terms of monetary expense, but in terms of gratifications. So it needs, decision making needs to happen within a context, and that context includes both internal and external environments. And when we talk about culture, this is part of the organization's internal environment that managers must be fully aware of, so that they make decisions that encompasses the attitudes, that encompass the the different perceptions of employees, and how can they use the culture to actually facilitate decision making and improve operations. So this is how culture impacts all aspects of managerial functions. نرجع مرة أخيرة للسؤال حقنا. Do managers have all the power, or are they constrained? They are definitely constrained, and we said that the environment is one aspect, the culture is another aspect. So here's an example of how culture basically constrains decision making. Okay, it goes into all of the managerial functions: planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. All of these managerial functions are definitely impacted and influenced by the culture. So let us consider this example. Google. Google is a huge, successful organization around globally. If you just look for some videos about the working environment at Google, you will be surprised. You would feel like you are in an amusement park. Everyone is playing, everyone they have toys and they have video games and they have lots of fun activities that they can do around the office. Still, they are among the most profitable organizations in the world. So they depend a lot on creativity and innovation. So they have created a culture that basically nurtures ideation, that basically paves the way for employees to become creative. Okay, so how can you make the culture in your organization creative? these are some of the aspects that you should consider. They are quite extensive. You don't really have to worry much about them when it comes to an exam, but you have to understand the concept. So if a company here in Saudi Arabia says that, okay, Google has made this, they have games and slides and things around the office, and they have become so successful, we will do the exact same thing and we will become as successful as Google. Can we say that they are going to be successful? Not really, because when Google did that, they considered the culture of the USA, they considered the stakeholders over there. Maybe things are different here in the kingdom. Okay, so the point I would like to emphasize is that just because Google was successful in implementing this kind of culture, it doesn't mean that when you copy it in your company, you are going to be as successful as Google. Maybe it will totally backfire and you will lose all your money. So you focus on the principles, you focus on the guidelines, you focus on the foundations. كيف وصلت جوجل للمرحلة هذه؟ هل هي الزحاليق والألعاب هي اللي خلت جوجل ناجحة ماديا؟ لا. It's things like this: risk taking, trust and openness, freedom. هذه الزحاليق والألعاب مش هدفها أن الموظفين يستانسون ويلعبون فقط، هدفها أن هم يرسلون رسالة للموظفين أنه إحنا ما يهمنا الحضور والغياب كذا من الساعة 7 للساعة الفلانية، احنا يهمنا الإنتاجية، يهمنا الإنتاجية. فبالتالي راح نعطيك الفريدم، راح نعطيك الحرية أن أنت تتصرف كيف ما تبغى. Okay, so these are the things that you should focus on if you want to establish a similar culture in your organization. Now, customer responsive cultures. So all for-profit organizations depend on customers for revenue, for profits. من فين تيجي الأرباح؟ تيجي من الزبائن اللي يشترون منتجاتنا وخدماتنا. So it means that customers are major stakeholders. نرجع للشرائح الأولى. Major stakeholders. So we want to keep them satisfied. So we have to select employees that can help us with this. So since our culture in our organization emphasizes customers and says that we value our customers, we have to understand that we need to select employees who have this personality, who have the ability to serve others. بعض الناس هو عنده سبحان الله هذا الطبع في شخصيته، يخدم الناس، يحب يخدم، فأنت دور على الناس هذول ووظفهم عندك في الشركة. على عكس بعض الأشخاص مش يشوف الخدمة كذا فيها انتقاص له، فيها مهانة له for some reason. These are the people that you should steer away from if you have such an organization. So what this table is about, it's suggestions to managers on what to do when you are selecting employees. Okay, so for example, if you look at the first one, you should hire people with personalities and attitudes consistent with customer service, people who are friendly. وظف ناس صبورين، الكاستمر صعب التعامل معاهم، ممكن يجيك واحد زعلان غاضب يسب، فلازم تختار ناس توظفهم في الكاستمر سيرفيس يكونون صبورين، حليمين، friendly، مبتسمين and so on. Okay, you should give them empowerment. When you empower, you give them the power to make decisions, you make them feel that they are important, you make them feel that they have a saying in decision making and they are really and truly part of the company. So go through this table and try to understand what aspects constitute and shapes a customer responsive culture. Sustainability is an important concept in today's business environments because it's a trend that all kinds of organizations are currently pursuing. Because every kind of organization is trying their best to adhere to societal norms and again to the constraints of the different environments in which they are operating. And more societies are demanding that organizations and businesses and industries become more sustainable. What that means is that, organizations need to think about the environment when it comes to their operations. We don't, as a society, we don't want, yes, we do want jobs, and yes, we do want our economy to be better and more efficient, but at the same time, we don't want this to harm and make our environment worse. We don't want depletion of our own natural resources. So, and as a business, we want to create products and services that are sustainable, that can exist for a very long time, that the customer and the user can have and use and enjoy for prolonged periods of time. So it's a challenge, but what this slide is trying to introduce is that sustainability is not something that you can simply impose on your employees. You have to build it into the culture. You have to create a mindset within your workforce, within your team, so that they, note sustainability in every aspect of their work, not only in the plant, and not only when it comes to product design, but in all aspects of their work. When you create a culture in which you are fostering sustainability and you are encouraging employees to always think about different ways of how can they help the company be more sustainable, then of course you are going to be more successful. The final concept that we will discuss in today's lecture is spirituality. So if you look up the meaning of this word, spirituality. So it means, sometimes people link it to religion. So what is religion? What does religion give you? خلينا نتكلم على الدين، مش الدين الإسلامي ولا الدين آخر، حنتكلم بس على الدين كإيمان، كعقيدة كذا عند الشخص، إنه إيش يوفر لك، ليش الناس تلتزم بديانة معينة. أوكي، يعطيها إحساس بالرضا، يعطيها الدين هذا يوفر للشخص إحساس إنه أنت جزء من شيء أكبر. هذا العالم اللي أنت فيه مش هذا هو نهاية الدنيا، في الشيء بعدها. أوكي، ويحسسك إن أنت جزء من ناس آخرين يشاركونك نفس القيم، يشاركونك نفس المبادئ، يشاركونك نفس التطلعات. Okay, so this is basically what spirituality is all about. So there are organizations that have created cultures that basically provide you with all of this, that makes you feel that you are part of a community, that makes you feel that you are part of something bigger. It's not only work, it's not only just coming to work at 7 and leaving at 4. It's not only about reports and data and statistics and customer service and HR. It's about something bigger than this. We serve the local community, for example. We provide good services to the to the society, to the people all around the world. We offer products and services that makes people's lives better. Okay, so this is what a spiritual culture in organization means. So workplace spirituality is a culture where organizational values promote a sense of purpose through meaningful work that takes place in the context of community. So a spiritual organization is an organization that makes you feel that you are important and you are doing something that is really impacting others. يخلوك تحس انه انت فعلا قاعد تسوي حاجة مهمة. خليني اعطيكم مثال رائع جدا. احد الشركات اللي تصنع خوذ الحماية اللي يلبسونها اللي يسوقون الدراجات النارية والدراجات الهوائية، خوذة الحماية اللي تنلبس على الراس، حاولوا انهم هم يعززون الثقافة عند موظفينهم إنه أنتم مو بس عمال مصنع تنتجون منتج، أنتم تساعدون في حماية حياة الناس، أنتم زيكم زي الدكاترة والجراحين تساهمون في إنقاذ حياة أشخاص. كيف؟ شوفوا كيف إيش سووا. جابوا ناس تعرضوا لحوادث مرورية، حوادث سير، هم على دراجاتهم سواء الهوائية ولا النارية، وخلوهم يشاركوا قصصهم مع موظفين وعمال المصنع. جاتك مثلا تقول لك أنا ابني عمره 15 سنة حصل له حادث بشع جدا، لكن لولا الخوذة حقتكم اللي انتم صنعتوها بأيديكم كان ممكن يكون ميت، لكن هو الآن بخير وبصحة ويروح المدرسة وراح يتزوج قريب. لاحظ كيف غيروا المفهوم حق العمل عند الناس اللي يشتغلون عند موظفينهم في المصنع. انتم مو بس منتجين اي برودكت وخلاص، انتم قاعدين تساهمون في انقاذ حياة بشر. So of course they have created a culture that is much stronger. Now the employees of the plants, the employees of this assembly line feel that we have a purpose. أنا أجي للساعة 7 مو عشان بس أذكرت، مو عشان بس أنا أخذ راتب آخر الشهر، أنا أجي على الوقت وأطلع على الوقت عشان أنا قاعد أساهم في إنقاذ حياة أشخاص. Okay, you have a greater meaning, you have meaningful work. My work actually now means something. Okay, so organizations with a spiritual culture recognize that people have a mind and spirit. So we work with people, human beings who have feelings, not machines and robots. So we have to take care of their mental health, we have to take care of their spiritual needs as well. They seek to find meaning and purpose in their work. معظم يومك يكون في العمل، معظم يومك يضيع في العمل. So تخيل انه انت كاره عملك، تخيل انه انت تحس انه عملك هذا ليس له فائدة وما له معنى على الاطلاق. ايش الكالتشر اللي حتكون في الشركة هذه؟ وانت كيف الانتاجية راح تكون حقتك؟ ما راح يكون لك نفس تشتغل اصلا. Okay, so people would like to have meaningful jobs. They want to have important jobs, something they feel that is contributing to society, for example. And finally, desire to connect with others and be part of a community. احنا بشر، والبشر يحتاجون إلى البشر الآخرين. نحتاج أن احنا نكون علاقات إنسانية، نحتاج أن احنا نكون صداقات، نحتاج أن احنا نكون علاقات so that we can live in this world. Okay? So organizations, when they realize these things, when they realize that people are people, they are not machines, when they realize that people want their work to be important and meaningful, when they realize that people have always the desire to make friends and establish relationships with others, now they are really realizing that we have to create a spiritual workplace. And finally, so the 5 cultural characteristics of spiritual organizations. So how can organizations create this spiritual culture? You have 5 factors, 5 characteristics. First of all, a strong sense of purpose, meaning. اوكي، زي ما شفنا في المثال قبل شويه وفي القصه حقت عمال مصنع الخوذ حقت الحمايه، اعطوهم strong sense of purpose. Now your job means something. Focus on individual development. So we recognize how important people are, and we make sure that we value those individuals. Okay, we understand that the people who work for us are extremely important and valuable, and without them we can never succeed. This organization will definitely fail. So they focus on the development of individuals. So they send them for training. They try their best to provide them with mentoring, guidance, coaching, and so on. Another factor is trust and openness. So mutual trust. I trust my organization as an employee, and the organization trusts me as well. So mutual means from both sides. Honesty and openness. So nothing is considered confidential. لما أطلب لستة حقوق الواجبات حقتي كموظف يعطوني إياها بكل صراحة. The company is not trying to deceive me by sending wrong messages or like contradicting, conflicting messages. They are always direct. They are always transparent. They say things as they are. And then number 4, empowerment. Empowerment comes from power. So you give me power. What does that mean? You give me the power to make decisions. You give me you at least listen to me. مو بس المانجر يتخذ القرار من غير ما يستشير أي أحد الموظفين اللي تحته. Empowerment means that me as a manager, I will give my employees at least the voice in expressing what they think about these decisions. مو بس أتخذ القرار وأنت عليك التنفيذ. I will at least consult you. Or maybe I will go even further than that by giving you the power to make the decision. And finally, number 5, tolerance of employee expression. So tolerance of employee expression, meaning that the company realizes that we are working with people, with human beings who have emotions, and sometimes these emotions are going to surface. Sometimes these emotions are going to show on the outside. So we tolerate this. We have no problem with this. Okay? So we have no problem with people expressing their feelings. بعض الشركات تسوي حاجة يسموها town hall meetings. هذه حتى سابق تسويها. كل شهر أو كل ربع سنة أو whatever. Okay? يسوون اجتماع كبير يحضرون فيه كل الموظفين، كل الرؤساء، كل المدراء، ويتكلمون بصراحة وشفافية عن أي حاجة أي حاجة بلا استثناء. مو شرط انه يكون التقارير والنتائج والكاستمر ساتسفاكشن، لا بكل صراحة. يا أخي بيقوم واحد من الموظفين: يا جماعة الخير أنا كاره جدا بيئة العمل عندنا. أنا كاره بيئة العمل، وكاره صراحة إنه بعض الموظفين عندهم عادات سيئة جدا، وكاره. It means that this place has no problem with people expressing their thoughts, no problem with people expressing what they feel. Okay? So such factors are going to definitely create a more positive environment within the organization, a more positive working environment, and a culture that fosters and nurtures better work and even more meaningful aspects of the job. So this concludes our chapter. I will see you on the next chapter. Good luck.